There are already a couple of 100,000 of these things in Australia, so you probably don't need me to introduce you to the Mazda 2. But what you might be wondering is why CarsGuide has uploaded a video review of a car that in its current generation is nearing 10 years old. Well, Mazda has done a light update on this little hatchback, and it's invited us here to have a crawl around and take it for a steer. It's a badge with more than 2 decades behind it here in Australia, but can this update keep it at the forefront of new car buyers' minds in an increasingly difficult small car market? There's no confirmed word of a next generation Mazda 2 just yet, but for this generation, this kind of visually striking update aims to keep it looking fresh. Some of the details of the update are a little bit minute, but I'm going to run you through all of that in this video. Here at the launch of this updated model, we've been able to put it through some fairly interesting dynamic testing, but for now, the main thing you're probably wondering is whether it's still worth it to buy a small hatchback rather than a small SUV. Mazda's not only up against direct rivals like the Toyota Yaris or the Suzuki Swift, but also the shifting market. This year so far, Mazda's sold just over 3,500 of the pre-facelift version of these, whereas its CX-3 small SUV has sold in numbers more than 11,000. And that small SUV is based on the same platform as our friend here. So, is there still value to be seen in this diminutive Demio? That's what it used to be called in Japan. The Mazda 2's pricing has stayed pretty competitive, with the entry-level model Pure in manual starting from just $22,410. The automatic for that is an extra $2,000, but this one is the step up from that. Standard features for the range, which start in the Pure variant, include a 7-inch touchscreen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto capability, plus auto headlights and windscreen wipers. I'll come back to the version I've got here, the step up from the Pure, which is the Pure SP that starts at $25,210. But above that is the Evolve, which starts from $25,910. It gains LED DRLs with a mesh grille replacing the block color panel here on the Pure SP. Its upholstery gets red stitching, and it's also got a couple more tech additions. The active heads-up driver's display features here on the Evolve, while traffic sign recognition and sat-nav are added too. Finally, at the top of the range, there's the GT from $27,610 before on-roads. It gains unique aero-inspired 16-inch alloy wheels, as Mazda calls them, plus a set of black leather upholstered seats with synthetic suede and red trim. A sedan version of the Pure or GT specifications is available at the same price as the hatch, though in Pure you can't have a manual in sedan, that's for the hatch only. For the full details of each grade, visit carsguide.com.au for the written review. This variant, the Pure SP, adds a few visual touches that I think make it look better than the rest of the variants in the range. Most obviously is this panel across the grille here that replaces the mesh. The colour of that is different depending on which body colour you get. This colour here is Aero Grey Metallic, but there's also Airstream Blue Metallic. Both of those are new to the Mazda 2 range. You might also notice this little coloured accent here, and that's all it is. It's just a little accent for design, but I think it's a nice little touch over the previous pre-facelift version. All of the Mazda 2 range has had its bumper redesigned generally, even the ones with the mesh grille, but there's more to this variant than just that. These 16-inch alloy wheels in black are specific to the Pure SP, plus it also gets these black mirror caps, and on the roof, it gets a carbon fiber look vinyl wrap. Mazda says that actually reduces the emissions of producing the car because they don't have to paint it. The updates at the back are a little bit more subtle. It still has a redesigned bumper across the range, but you might notice here, it's the same little coloured accent as the front to match. Some of them are red, but on this car, they're yellow. Not heaps has changed for the update here in the interior, but there are a couple of things that are new. Depending on which variant you get, this design panel here is different, and the seats are actually different depending on the variant as well. For a little bit of convenience for the driver's seat, the headlights are now automatic as well as the wipers, both new for the Pure and Pure SP variants. Other than that though, visually the interior of the Mazda 2 is pretty familiar. There's a couple of USB ports down here that you can plug in your phone for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, but the screen itself, which you can only use as a touchscreen in park, is about the same as it always has been. The media controls are also still down here as they have been for years in Mazdas, with some fairly basic buttons around. Steering wheel, again, the same. Buttons all pretty ergonomically sound and sensible, with not too much to distract you in front of you as the driver. Even the speedometer is actually still a physical dial. And in terms of simplicity, a little bit of old school is still good. All of the climate controls are still physical buttons and dials, which means you don't have to really take your eyes off the road too much while you're changing the temperature. It's a small hatchback, so here in the back seat is not going to be the most spacious of places, but I'm 5'11", and there's enough space in front of my knees for me to be able to wiggle around a little bit. My feet actually don't get shoved under the seat in front of me. There's heaps of space for them as well. The headrest is in a pretty good spot, even if I can kind of feel my head touching the roof just a bit when I lean back. But the seat itself is pretty comfortable. There could probably be a little bit more thigh support because I kind of have to shift around to find a comfortable spot, and my legs are touching the seat in front of me now. Storage in the back here though isn't amazing. There's not really anywhere to put a drink aside from this bit up here in the center console, nowhere in the door, and not even an armrest in the center seat. Back here in the boot, because the Mazda 2 isn't huge, neither is its boot space. It has 250 litres, which is like pretty good for a small hatch, but not amazing considering you could get 300, 400 in an SUV. If you get the sedan though, Mazda claims you get 440 litres of boot space. The 1.5 litre 4-cylinder petrol engine available across the Mazda 2 range is basically the same one you used to be able to get in the MX-5, just with a lower tune. In manual cars, which is the base model pure, it comes with 82 kilowatts and 144 newton meters, but for the rest of the range in automatic, it's 81 kilowatts and 142 newton meters. That drop of 1 kilowatt and 2 newton meters, Mazda says, has improved efficiency and reduced fuel consumption by a fair bit. Instead of the 5.3 litres that automatic used to use, Mazda claims that the new automatic setup uses 5 litres. For the manuals though, it's still 5.4 litres as it always was. We're on a launch, so we haven't had a chance to properly test that claim at the pump though. And less power and torque by that tiny little margin isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it'll probably save you a little bit of money at the pump and you won't notice it behind the wheel. It's been a couple of years since I last sat in a Mazda 2, but this update hasn't really changed the way it drives very much. Everything's pretty predictable, the steering is nicely weighted, and the car feels light and nimble, but it doesn't feel loose or unstable. And even though its outputs aren't necessarily impressive on paper, it feels pretty perky. Its engine doesn't take too long to pick up speed once you find its sweet spot, and the gearbox is pretty good at finding that spot anyway. Plus, of course, as I mentioned, manual fans will be happy to know that in at least one grade of this car, you can still get a car with 3 pedals. That manual gearbox, which I sampled a little bit today, is still as good as it ever was. 6 speeds and a nice little smooth movement that feels a little bit sporty. Plus, 6th gear is very highway friendly. The engine isn't working too hard when you're doing 100 or even 110. Dynamically, if you are after a bit of fun, the Mazda 2 handles itself pretty well on windy roads. Everything happens pretty much as you would want it to, it's predictable, and that makes you feel comfortable and inspires a bit of confidence. It's not boring, but it does feel safe. Speaking of safe, some of the features in this car are noticeable only when they need to be. For example, the lane departure mitigation is actually pretty well tuned. It's really gentle and just kind of nudges you as you approach the center line back into a safer spot. And as we got to find out today, the Mazda 2 can handle some pretty intense situations quite well. Mazda set up a course for us to basically retake our driving test with a few added extras, and the Mazda 2 handled things like ABS braking and a reverse slalom fairly well. Plus, at lower speeds where the Mazda 2 is probably going to spend a lot of its time, it's pretty easy, comfortable and convenient for things like maneuvering and parking. And really, that's, in a hatchback, one of the most important things. The updated Mazda 2 is equipped with the brand's suite of iActiveSense safety tech, which includes smart city brake support for both forward and reverse, blind spot monitoring, and rear cross traffic alert. The Evolve and GT models are fitted with traffic sign recognition, while the GT top spec grade comes fitted with parking sensors at the front and a 360-degree surround view parking monitor. Mazda isn't going to put the Mazda 2 up for a new crash test rating by ANCAP, though its original rating from 2015 was 5 stars. That rating's a little bit out of date now with new testing criteria, but structurally the Mazda 2 is pretty much the same. Mazda has a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty across the range, which Mazda 2 falls under. Scheduled servicing costs in the current pre-facelift model range from $334 to $586, and they're undertaken every 15,000 Ks. Given the minimal mechanical changes after the facelift, that should remain about the same. After a little bit of time in the Mazda 2, I'm happy to report that the first car fodder, cheap and cheerful hatchback is just as fun and convenient as it used to be. Plus, in this case, it hasn't gotten much more expensive than it was before. If you're looking at something like a small SUV, I'd strongly recommend checking out what is likely the same platform hatchback version instead. It's smaller, it's more efficient, and it's easier to drive. Plus, since this generation might be on its way out in a couple of years' time, the next generation might not be as cheap. If you reckon the hatchback is dead, I don't. Long live the hatchback.